Well, good morning, Liz.
Good morning, Dan.
Careers and
Welcome
Coffee.
to Careers and Coffee podcast.
Yeah, what do you know? We're back. Well, if you can't tell, we're recording this right around Halloween 2021. I got the pumpkins on my front porch ready to hand out some candy to the kids.
Yeah, we're getting our costumes ready, so we'll be over.
Okay, I'll make sure I'll double up your kids' pots.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well,
Right
enough Halloween talk. Let's talk about some interview questions that you might hear from employers when you are interviewing for a job. So, Liz, do you have some of those?
Yeah, well, we were kind of trying to figure out what are job seekers searching for, and we do get there is a lot of search intent around interview questions and how to answer them, especially if you haven't interviewed for a job in a long time or in some time, if you've been out of work for a little while or you've just been working and you haven't been seeking another job. It's easy to get rusty on these interview questions, and they can be scary when you're thinking, I don't know how to answer this. So I just looked up kind of the top interview questions, and typically what we're seeing employers ask a lot of is what is known as a behavioral interview. And the reason that they use behavioral interviews is it's supposed to be a fairly unbiased way of evaluating potential employees for how they perform in the workplace. So when it says behavior, what's it's asking you is, what was your behavior at work, working on a task? So that kind of rolls into some of these questions. So some of those are like, you may have heard of these before. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with someone within the organization. How did you deal with it? So that's a typical, hopefully you never have any conflicts at your workplace, right?
Yeah, is that a little bit of a trick question?
It is, isn't it? I think they're just asking when there's differences of opinion. They're not necessarily like serious conflicts. They're just, when you encounter issues, how do you deal with them? So let's say somebody didn't do something right at work and it impacted you, and how did you deal with that? So how to answer that question, a lot of sites will tout what's called the STAR method, and that's just an acronym for situation, task, action, and result. And so it's going to say, when you reflect back on this question, ask yourself, what was the problem that I can remember, and these are questions you can prepare for well ahead of an interview. You're going to be asked maybe some version of this question. So you'll just kind of have in your back pocket of like, okay, it's almost like a movie star going on a talk show. You have an anecdote in your pocket, right? So what was the problem? And be as specific as you can. But, don't just throw anybody under the bus. Just say, this happened at work. And then determine what the task was related to it. So what was the goal? What did you need to do that the situation called for? And then A stands for action. So what specific actions did you take to reach the goal? And then report back on what the final outcome was. And of course, this situation, when you're describing, you control which example you used. And so you're always going to pick one where the result was positive for you. So yes, it is a trick question in that, it's like, what is your greatest weakness, right? Like being too detail oriented, right? That's what everyone says.
Could be your greatest strength too, right? But a lot of these questions, I feel like, and if you're listening to this, you're probably getting the sense like, okay, some of these are tougher questions to answer, and you almost end up BSing your way through this a little bit, right? Like maybe, coming up with, oh wow, I had a conflict at work. I mean, it wasn't a fist fight or something, but it was like, okay, had this issue, had to go through it this way. What would you say to somebody that maybe gets completely caught off guard by a question like this?
I think
that feels like they need to just come up with anything.
Right. Well, I think that's the advantage of looking at interview questions before you have an interview, before you're faced with an interview, because they're always going to ask you similar style questions. They may not be exactly the same, but there are resources in town where you could do a mock interview with someone and they can really help coach you on, here's another way to respond, and especially when you're talking about behavioral answers, you may not have really great people skills, and you may have trouble reading, um, you know, how someone else is feeling. So not everybody has the same level of what they call soft skills. And so doing a prep interview that has no stakes, right? Like a mock interview, whether it's with a career counselor or just with a friend even, is going to really help you set up, because you'll have a second person there saying, hey, when you answered this, you really sounded defensive and you really want to just sound confident and calm in an interview, which is super hard to do when you're faced with it after not having to do it for a while.
Right. That's a really
best
good
way to
point.
do it is practice. I mean, that practice makes perfect. Practice makes you feel less anxious going into it. And you also have a level of control when you practice that you don't have when you're there in the interview. So I would just suggest practicing, practicing, practicing.
Yeah, and it's a really good point that you bring that up. And I think there's other ways that you can, say maybe you live alone like I do, and you don't always have somebody to practice with, right? I feel like you could easily just record yourself on video, right, with your phone. You could hop on Zoom real quick and just record yourself, see what you look like. Number one, I think getting a sense for your tone, like a lot of times, I think that can just kind of get you through some of those behavioral interview questions. Because it's not necessarily so much a right or wrong answer, I feel like, with those questions. It's more about how you respond to it, and
Right.
how you conduct yourself through a kind of an awkward question even.
Yeah, all of these questions that are kind of behavioral focused are going to be difficult questions to answer. And that's the point, is they don't want to ask you a yes or no question, because they want to learn about you as a candidate to see if you're the right fit. So like, they may ask you about a time you worked on a challenging project. How did you rise to the occasion? Maybe tell me about what teamwork means to you. Like, how do you work in a team? And I think one of the things that I would look for as a hiring manager is, how well does this person display that they have a history of listening, like a history of listening to others, and managing expectations as well as managing their time. Those are things that I'd be looking for. But the questions that maybe a manufacturer might be looking for is display a a high work ethic or something like that. And so you can always, if you ever feel like you're in an interview and you feel like, okay, I'm stuck, you can always just be straightforward and say, you know what, I'm not real sure how to answer that question, but here's what I will tell you. I'm a really hard worker. You can always pivot to that, because that's always the number one thing everyone's looking for, right? Like, and that's something that as Iowans, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like as Iowans, that is a core strength that a lot of people have, as a high work ethic. So just pivot to that. Preparation can only take you so far, and there is going to be uncomfortable moments in an interview. That's just the way it goes. And the employer may throw you for a loop. They may ask you a really weird question. And so just setting yourself up for, like, okay, well, I'm just thinking ahead here. If they ask me a really strange question, I'm going to go to this response. And that just gives you another sense of control, another feeling of control.
Yeah, preparation. Practice makes perfect, right?
Practice makes prepared, right?
Prepared.
It's always, it's always scary going to a job interview. There's no way around it. It is a little bit anxiety producing, but
that's normal.
That's normal. And employers do want to listen. They want to hear what you have to say. So kind of come at it with a positive attitude.
Yeah, I love that. I've always thought, whenever I've felt anxiety or something like performance, or, I was played sports growing up. I used to get nervous before a big competition. I always try to use that to fuel something better rather than look at it as a negative, like, oh my gosh, like I'm nervous right now. Like I don't know what to, how to act. Try to use that to fuel something greater inside of me.
Yeah. And, I was a performance major in college, and we would always do weird stuff, like we'd eat a banana before a performance. Supposedly, one person said, we did not fact check this, but they were like, oh yeah, if you eat a banana, the potassium in it will really slow everything down.
I love that.
So we're all outside before we perform eating bananas.
Help with the mentality for sure.
Exactly. It's like, all right, I'm in go mode now.
Yeah.
And so you guys can get there too. You don't have to be performance major or a sports athlete. You can do a little practice and use your anxiety to fuel a really great interview.
Awesome. I love it. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us this week on Careers in Coffee. Liz, thank you so much.
Have a good one. Bye.